My name is Estrida Orly Tantillo, and as the Newberry's president and librarian, it is my honor to welcome you to this year's award celebration. We are very pleased that all of you are here and grateful for your participation in the life of the Newberry, especially on this august occasion. Your support of this event plays a crucial role in enabling our efforts to sustain a dynamic community of learning centered around our unique and invaluable collection. Your contributions and support are deeply appreciated. Thank you so very much. The annual award dinner is a highlight of the year for the Newberry. As one of the foremost research libraries in the world and one of Chicago's most notable cultural institutions, the Newberry Award honors and celebrates an individual or organization whose remarkable contributions to the humanities deserve our highest recognition. Tonight, we are so excited to be honoring Henry Louis Gates, Jr., and I know that all of you are really looking forward to the central part of the evening. Before we introduce Professor Gates and speak of his illustrious career and accomplishments, I would like to spend a few minutes to talk a little bit more about the Newberry and its enduring mission since its founding in 1887. In 1893, when our beautiful building was completed and the doors opened, the Chicago Tribune wrote that the library had a marvelous collection of materials and aspired to grow them, but that it also meant to be a great deal more than a place for quiet reflection and research. It meant to be a live educational center. As the video you have just seen has illustrated, we are very much so today. In fact, we hold the distinction of being the first institution in Chicago to provide college-level instruction to individuals who lack the financial means or time for higher education. That spirit of accessible learning not only defined our early years, it continues to drive our mission today in so many different ways. Whether we provide, thanks to the generous support of a donor, free professional development courses for Chicago public school teachers, or whether thanks to foundation and philanthropic support, we provide free instructional and digital resources for teachers and students, or whether we provide, as we do 5 days a week in person and online 24/7, access to our materials free of charge and free of barriers. The Newberry means different things to different people. We are a destination for the international scholarly research community, a place to see world-class exhibitions, a repository for historical materials par excellence, whether a handwritten composition by Mozart, yesterday's protest posters, digital archives of a dance troupe, or one of the best map collections in the world. We're a resource for teachers and students, book clubs, a place for bookshop browsing, expert-led tours, author events, public performances. What unites all these aspects is an enthusiasm and love for the humanities and the Newberry's role as a center for the renewal of the humanities today. In a few minutes, we will have the opportunity of discussing with Professor Gates his role in opening the world of history, especially personal histories, and how they relate to the larger historical context of our lives, the lives of our ancestors, and the lives of the country. As we have this conversation, I invite you to think about the Newberry as a resource par excellence for genealogy, for historical research, and for the humanities in general. While some aspects of the humanistic practice are solitary, many are really team sports, and or at least require the friendly assistance of others, and here the Newberry is your friend and resource. To fully participate in this enterprise, one needs extraordinary resources, and such resources embody the Newberry. We provide ready access to our remarkable and ever-growing collection. Our amazing staff stands ready to provide assistance. We create a community for inquiry through our public programs and seminars, and our public events create the inspiration for questions and the desire to know more. So come to the Newberry to find your roots or the roots of historical events. Not only can you use our resources to discover your family history within greater historical context, you can come to the library to see letters written by George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, or books annotated by them. If you wish to uncover the original sources for constitutional debates today, come to the Newberry and see handwritten draft documents of the Federalist Papers, including those that outline worries about federal government interference. Come to see the rare translation. Come to see the rare translation of the Bible that fueled the Reformation, the earliest surviving opera, The Cortez Map. The Newberry's collection and public programs are truly democratic because the joys of discovery and exploration are available to everyone, free of charge and without any kind of barrier, because of and thanks to the support of our larger community. This is an exciting time for the Newberry as we aim to increase our public presence in our city, country, and world, and thereby even more rigorously serve our original mission of promoting the humanities and making them accessible to all. I invite you to think of the Newberry as a source of joy and inspiration because of our amazing collections, whether they represent momentous or local historical events or beautiful or whimsical objects. We hope to reach you and a broader public through our public programs, exhibitions, lectures, events, and online resources. So I very much hope to see very many of you at the Newberry soon. And now to turn, I think, to the parts of the event we're all been waiting for. But before that, I just want to thank so many people who have been involved, including all of you here. My thanks to everyone in this room and those who support the Newberry who are not able to be here this evening. Thank you to our trustees, our foundation, educational, and corporate sponsors. Thank you for purchasing tables and tickets, for bringing your friends and colleagues to share in the celebration of the Newberry, and for your support. I would also like the staff who made this evening possible, especially Jennifer Schulman, who has been tireless in her efforts to create this wonderful event. And I would like to specifically thank Newberry trustee Greg Barton, whose longstanding commitment to the Newberry shines through his leadership as this year's award celebration chair. His unwavering commitment and passion for the humanities has been instrumental in making tonight a success. Thank you, Greg, for being a true friend and champion of the Newberry. And now I will turn the program over to Greg. Please join me in welcoming Greg Barton, trustee.
Thank you, Estrida. And since I've already mentioned this to about half of you in the room, yes, I did find my phone, and thank you for your help. Good evening. I'm Greg Barton, a Newberry trustee and chair of tonight's award celebration. I'm very honored and excited to welcome this year's Newberry Award recipient, Professor Henry Louis Gates, Jr. On a personal note, this is especially fun for me because I've been working on genealogy since I was about 13 and have been watching Professor Gates' acclaimed TV show, Finding Your Roots, almost since its inception in 2012. But Professor Gates is more than just a rock star genealogist. An Emmy, DuPont, and Peabody Award-winning filmmaker, literary scholar, cultural critic, Professor Gates has significantly shaped our understanding of history and culture. His extensive body of work, including impactful documentaries such as The Black Church and Gospel. His insightful perspective continues to enrich our literary landscape with his latest book, The Black Box, Writing the Race, celebrated as one of this year's best. His upcoming work explores the history of Black and Jewish communities. Proudly born and raised in West Virginia, Professor Gates achieved honors at Yale University and continued his academic journey at Cambridge. His profound impact on the literary world includes the significant discovery of the first novel penned by a Black woman. Among his many distinguished honors are a MacArthur Genius Grant and a National Humanities Medal. Currently, he lends his expertise as the Alphonse Fletcher University professor and director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Henry Louis Gates, Jr.
Thank you, brother.
We're honored by your work for the humanities and grateful for your contributions. Thank you very much and congratulations.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I put it here?
Yes. Thank
Give it up for a brother who had lost his cell phone for the last hour. I mean, so poised. And he has to catch a flight at 6:30 tomorrow morning because your nephew, right, is, how do you say it, doing his final orders? Final vows to become a priest. And so that's how the cell phone came back. Thank you to the leaders of the Newberry for this wonderful honor. I'm truly touched and truly proud to be recognized by the Newberry, an institution that I've admired for so very long. My former colleague at Harvard, the great critic of poetry, Helen Vendler, once said something that stayed with me, and I quote, "For the mind and imagination, bookstores aren't enough, college courses aren't enough, the internet isn't enough. Those resources are all governed by the tastes and needs of the moment," she wrote. "Only libraries take the long view, quietly shelving the unused with the used, knowing that one of these days, the two categories will be reversed by a student's discovery of those hitherto undisturbed volumes whose contents will unsettle the learned world," unquote. Isn't that beautiful? And isn't that exactly right? And nowhere embodies that spirit more beautifully than the Newberry. I've spent countless hours in reading rooms here and elsewhere, pulling folders from boxes and shelves, paging through forgotten manuscripts and pamphlets, and feeling that unmistakable jolt. Wait, no one's connected these dots before. It's the kind of moment that keeps scholars and students and writers coming back. It's a reminder that history is not settled. It's alive, it's dynamic, it's full of surprises for those willing to look closely enough. One of my heroes, the great Cambridge physicist Stephen Hawking, once said, "It is the past that tells us who we are. Without it, we lose our identity." Now, Stephen was talking about the cosmos, about the age of the universe. But his words apply just as powerfully, if you think about it, to nations, to communities, to each of us. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we find ourselves living in a moment when there are real pressures, political and cultural, to sand down the rough edges of our past, to tell a simpler, safer story. But history isn't simple. Identity isn't simple. And if we're serious about understanding who we are, we have to be willing to confront the full complexity of where we come from. Genealogy, for me, has been one way to do that. Tracing the paths of our ancestors opens doors onto the messy, beautiful realities that have shaped us. But it's just one path among many. Whether through genealogy, archival research, or the recovery of lost literary voices, every effort to look honestly into the past is an act of respect, an act of courage. Institutions like the Newberry stand as the bulwark against forgetting, against simplification. They remind us that truth is richer, harder, and more essential than any comforting myth we might prefer to tell. So thank you, not just for this honor, but for the work you do every day. Thank you for keeping the doors open, the shelves full, and the long view alive for all of us still searching, still listening, still learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. That was so lovely. And I know that everybody's so excited to have you here. And I also want to say congratulations. I understand Finding Your Roots is the most popular non-drama on PBS.
#1, baby. Margot had a fabulous family tree. Very distinguished lawyer, about which he knew nothing a couple hundred years ago. He's Cuban. My wife is Cuban. She was a professor at the University of Havana for 25 years. A master, mistress of the archive, however I'm supposed to say that politically. She loves the archive. And she could trace back to her 12th grade grandfather, Rodrigo de somebody, who was with Columbus when he came to Cuba. So
wow.
It's pretty amazing, yeah. What I liked about Marco Rubio, he had to leave to vote at the Senate and then came back so we could continue, and was just sweet and engaged and really wonderful. And it's one of the things that, the reason that I hold certain beliefs and comport myself in a certain way in relationship to people's political ideology. When I was an undergraduate at Yale, when I was in high school, I used to watch William F. Buckley's Firing Line. You remember that? And I loved that. And Chris Buckley was in my class. I loved William F. Buckley, Jr. I mean, he used all those big words. He's so outrageous. And remember Allard Lowenstein? He was so liberal and he was assassinated. And who eulogized Al Lowenstein? William F. Buckley, Jr. They were best friends. They were in the same country club. They played tennis together. And I remember reading that as an undergraduate thinking, the world's a lot more, at the highest levels, a lot more complicated than you would think. Remember my generation, I'm class of 73. We were the Wild West, those were the Wild West years of revolution. And everything was so stark. The binary oppositions everywhere. And there's William F. Buckley's best friend being a guy he would beat up on his television show. And so I never let ideology and interrupt my friendships or interfere with my friendships. Because my hero in the black tradition is W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois was born in 1868. He's a Reconstruction baby. He died in 1963 on the eve of the March on Washington. And Du Bois canceled himself. Du Bois embraced every ideology possible and in a contradictory way in succession. He believed in integration, and he believed in self-segregation, and he believed in the Pan-African movement after he'd attacked Marcus Garvey for the Pan-African movement. He believed in the potential capitalism, and he said he was a socialist of the path. And finally, he died in Ghana as a communist. So, what are you going to do? He was the smartest black man on the face of the earth. You got to throw out the early Du Bois and keep the late Du Bois, or vice versa. Du Bois wrote that he believed in a kingdom of culture. He said, I sit with Shakespeare, and he winces not. Across the color line, I move arm in arm with Balzac and Dumas, where smiling men and welcoming women glide in gilded halls from out the caves of evening that swing between the strong-limbed earth and the tracery of the stars. I sit with Aristotle and Aurelius and what soul I will, and they come all graciously with no scorn nor condescension. So, wed with truth, I dwell above the veil. And that's where I want to be. And that's where you want to be, because you love libraries and you love knowledge and you love the pursuit of truth. And we can't let our differences of political belief separate us as a people who love the truth, who love literature, who love knowledge, and in this case, love one of the greatest libraries on the face of the earth.
That's so amazingly lovely. And I mean, one of the topics I wanted to talk about is your latest book, The Black Box, because I think especially the way the book concludes has very many of these same sentiments. And I know that sometimes we have university crowds here, University of Chicago, University of Illinois, Chicago, DePaul University. I know that sometimes these sentiments can be kind of controversial. And so, but I actually wrote some things down because I just thought, what we owe to each other and to ourselves is a shared sense of wonder and awe as we contemplate works of the human imagination across space and time, works created by people who don't look like us. And the freedom to write can thrive only if we protect the freedom to read and to learn. And perhaps the first thing to learn in these storm-battered times is that we could all do with more humility and more humanity.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was a lovely way
Thank you.
Of concluding this very interesting book. Obviously, the book is also meant for college students, but I think this is based on lectures and a course you were teaching. What do you hope people will take away from your class or your book or your television shows?
Well, that course was the contents of my latest book, The Black Box. The Black Box is based on a lecture series that I did for years at Harvard, the Introduction to African American Studies. And it was structured around the debates that black people have had with each other about everything since the 18th century, really. And I wanted to do it. I think that particularly now, I think that every university should have a similar introductory course when we would take great ideas and have a pro and a con, have a left and a right, so that students could realize that there was not one way to approach complex questions, that a person could be on the right or on the left and have enormous integrity and sincerity and make a case for one interpretation, and then another person could make a case for an opposite interpretation, so that they could see that truth is complex. So I wanted, when I was an undergraduate, and I graduated in the class 73, as I said, so there were so many ideological bullies on the Yale campus. There was a Liggett's drugstore, and on the corner of York Street and Elm Street. And to get to the Yale Co-op, the bookstore, I called it running the gauntlet. On the corner was this big guy who was selling the Black Panther Party paper. So you had to get by him, right? He's a bully, he had a beret on, so brother, you bought the... Then you had to invent some lie. Well, I already got it. I bought it at the office, right? So if you made a pass the Black Panther, there was a guy in a bow tie. He represented Chicago's own Elijah Muhammad, right? We called him the bow tie guys. The messenger speaks. So he said, do you have Minister Elijah Muhammad's latest newspaper? Said, I got it, brother, I got it, Then, further down the street would be a guy in a dashiki, representing the cultural nationalists. The organization was called US, capital U, capital S. And it was created by former Leroy Jones, who became Amiri Baraka, and Maulana Karenga, Ron Karenga. And they wanted you to they wore dashikis, wanted you to learn Swahili, and, power to the people. You'd say, habari gani. I knew enough Swahili to get by that book, right? So I called it running the gauntlet, and it was exhausting going by these three guys without going broke buying their three trashy old newspapers, So, and there were a lot of tragedies. My best friend, one of my best friends, Eddie Jackson, was in love with this white girl. Went to Catholic school, Albertus Magnus, up the hill from Yale. And he loved this girl. She was of Irish descent. And he broke up with her because it was not politic to date across the color line, that he couldn't be black if he was in love with this white girl. And it broke his heart. He never ever recovered. So I was raised to be a doctor. As far as my mother was concerned, in heaven was the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, and a medical doctor. The smart little color boys and color girls became doctors when I was growing up. Christmas, dissecting kids, stethoscopes, the whole thing. And if you don't get in med school, then you could be a lawyer. But, so I never dreamed that I would be at the head of a class. But I thought, if I ever was in a position to communicate the following message, I would do that. And that message was that you cannot allow yourself to be bullied by the ideological flavor of the month. And so when I finally became a professor, Cornel West taught the Introduction to African American Studies course at Harvard. And when he left to go to Princeton, I inherited it. And so I structured it around debates that black people have had in the tradition over the last 200 years. And I would start off by saying our people have been arguing with each other about what it means to be black and how the hell to get out of here since the first 20 Africans got off the first slave ship in Jamestown in 1619. And so, and the last thing that I say, and anybody knows that who goes to a black barbershop or a black beauty parlor, we just argue all the time. And the last thing I say in my last lecture, which is in the book, is that if there's only one thing you take away from this class, if there's only one thing that you remember, please remember that if there are 47 million African Americans, as there are today, if there are 47 million African Americans, that means there are 47 million ways to be black. Never let a bully tell you that there's one way to be black. And in fact, if they tell you that, you can tell them to kiss your black, whatever.
So do you have a favorite library or archive experience?
Me? A favorite library experience? Yes. Big time. Boy, I have so many. I love libraries. My first ambition was to be a librarian because it was the only way that I could imagine being surrounded by books. So I love libraries, and I love librarians. James Baldwin became a friend of mine. I met him when I was 22 at his house in Saint Paul de Vence near Nice. And I just graduated from Yale, and I got a job at Time magazine. I got a fellowship to go to the University of Cambridge, where subsequently I'd get my PhD in English, though I didn't know that at the time. And I had published a guest column at the Yale Daily News. And as soon as I got that fellowship, the Mellon Fellowship, I wrote to Time magazine, because the founders of Time magazine were Yaleys, right? And Kit Luce, Henry Christopher Luce, Henry Luce's grandson, was a good friend of mine. And when Strobe Talbot, who's a very famous journalist and expert on Russia, when he got a Rhodes Scholarship, Time hired him for the summers when he was in England. So I wrote to them and said, you did that to Strobe Talbot, how about me, right? So to my amazement, they hired me. So the day after I graduated, I got on the QE2 and I sailed to Southampton, and I started writing for Time magazine. Well, as soon as I got there, I realized that we had a story conference every Monday, and that you could suggest stories. So the story that I suggested, once I got my footing, was to do a story on black expatriates. Black writers and artists living in Europe, because I wanted to meet James Baldwin. The first black writer I ever read was James Baldwin, and it was the summer of 1965. I was at Episcopal Church Camp. And if you remember, August of 1965 was the Watts riots. And this church camp in the Diocese of West Virginia was about 18 miles from my home. I grew up in an Irish-Italian paper mill town in eastern West Virginia, halfway between Pittsburgh and Washington, D.C., where I would later learn, genealogically, my family on all sides, back to my fourth great grandparents, have lived for 200 years. 3 sets of my fourth great grandparents lived 30 miles from where I was born, and they all knew each other. And 2 sets were freed by the American Revolution, and the 3rd set, Joe and Sarah Bruce, were freed in the will of Abraham Van Meter in 1821, and they all knew each other. I'm a Redman on my mother's side and Redman on my father's side. So the Gateses were Episcopalians. That's Daddy's side. My mother's family were Methodists, serious Methodists. And I joined that Methodist church when I was 12. And I didn't, my mother was sick, and I thought she was going to die. And it was the worst night of my life, and I prayed to God that prayed to Jesus, if you let my mother live, I'll give my life to Christ. And I didn't tell anybody. And 3 days later, miraculously, my mother came home. And so I was so happy to see her. And that night when I went to bed, I passed the mirror and I go, uh-oh. I had to deal with Jesus, right? So I joined this church. The following Saturday, I hitchhiked 5 miles to the county seat. There was one black preacher for 2 churches. One in Piedmont, which is where the Westvaco paper mill was located just across the river. And the county seat was in Kaiser. So there were 2 black Methodist churches, and there was one minister, and we shared the minister. So the black Methodist church in Kaiser, the county seat, had their service on Saturday. And we in Piedmont had our service on Sunday morning. So I hitchhiked. I was 12 years old, and I hitchhiked. The Saturday service was in the late afternoon. I hitchhiked 5 miles. I didn't tell my parents. And when I got to this service, there were only about 14 people there, and the average age was about 80 years old, right? And there's a moment in the Methodist service where it's called the call to the altar. Does anyone want to give their life to Christ? And I stood up, and I swear the minister said, Skippy, the bathroom is over there. And I said, no, I want to join the church. And they all went crazy, nobody could believe it. And it was very moving. I'm going to get to the library. I want you to know I haven't had anything to drink yet. I'm just telling a tale. And it was one of the most moving things in my life. And the minister asked 5 questions. Will you do this? Promise to do this, promise to do that, promise to do that. And I said, yeah. And all the people in the church gathered around me. And they all cried, and I cried. And then I think the minister gave me a ride home. And I had to pledge not to go to basketball games, not to play cards, and not to go to the movies. I mean, it was a very strict fundamentalist church. But I had this deal, and I was keeping my mother alive, right? But I never told my mother and never told my father. That night, every Saturday night, we would watch Bonanza. Remember Bonanza? No, Gunsmoke. Gunsmoke. Bonanza was on Sunday, Gunsmoke. And we would string beans. My mother, we always had fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and corn. And you had to string the beans. So I'm stringing the beans. That was my job. And we were watching Gunsmoke. And my father loved to do the crossword puzzle in the evening. And he was doing the crossword puzzle, and he said, well, anybody do anything interesting today? And I said, I thought it was as good a time as any. I go, yeah, I joined the church. They go, what? Are you crazy? Why in the world would you do that? So anyway, after 2 years of being strictly, I did the best that I could, at this fundamentalist church, I began to feel like a hypocrite because I was worshiping with people who thought the world had been created in 7 days and that there actually was a Noah and there was an ark and the whole thing. And I had the same brain then that I have now, and I felt like a hypocrite. They didn't know anything about allegory or figurative language. And so I quit and went to my father's church. So that's why I'm at this Episcopal church camp, because I'm about to be confirmed. And we're cut off from the world. And on the Sunday, they brought in a newspaper, and the big headline was, Negroes Riot in Watts. And all the white kids, there were, how many black Episcopalians are there in Chicago, let alone West Virginia, right? So there were 3 black kids at this Episcopal church camp. So all these white kids were in a circle. And I walked over to them, and they all looked at me in a weird way. And I looked over the shoulder and saw this headline, like Negroes were rioting in what? I didn't know what a riot was. I didn't know if that meant black people killing white people killing black people. And I had no idea where Watts was. And that night, this Episcopal priest came to our dorm room and gave me a book by James Baldwin, Notes of a Native Son. And it was the first time I read a book by a black author. So I had a commonplace book, and I would transcribe his sentences. I loved the way he used language. Each of us, helplessly and forever, contains the other. Male and female, female and male, white and black, black and white. We are a part of each other. Many of my countrymen find this fact exceedingly inconvenient and even unfair, and so very often do I. But none of us can do anything at all about it. James Baldwin, ladies and gentlemen. Come on, you got to give it up for that. So, cut to London, cut to Time Magazine. What do I pitch? I want to do a story about about black expatriates because I wanted to go to the south of France and interview him. It's August of 1973, and Josephine Baker, you all know about Josephine Baker, had just announced that she was going back to the stage. Josephine Baker, who had gone to Paris exactly 100 years ago this year, and we're commemorating that at a conference at the Sorbonne in November for Jimmy and Josephine, because Baldwin had his centennial last year, and Josephine left the States 100 years this year. So, to make a long story short, I took Josephine Baker to James Baldwin's house for dinner. And it was the greatest night of my life. We drank Chateau Margaux, and Baldwin had 4 men there who were lovers of different times in his life. And I had my girlfriend, and they talked about people that they had made love with, people they wanted to make love with, people they might make love with. They just talked smack and talked trash. And I was just a little cub, reporter, just furiously taking notes. And then I had a rented Peugeot, and we drove Josephine Baker back to our house in Nice, which Princess Grace had given her after she had gone bankrupt and was kicked out of the chateau. She had adopted 12 little kids, the Rainbow Tribe, right? So, cut to, and then I got to know James Baldwin. I became a baby professor, so I brought him to Yale. And I decided to take him to the Beinecke Rare Book Library, which is my favorite library in the world because I wrote my first research paper ever on Bessie Smith when I was 19 years old in the Beinecke, because the Beinecke had the James Weldon Johnson papers, which they opened in 1950. And you used to have to write with a pencil. No pens were allowed. And that was the first research paper that I ever did. And I helped to facilitate the purchase of Richard Wright's archive, because his widow, Ellen Wright, was living in Paris and was acting as Eldridge Cleaver's agent. And I had interviewed Eldridge and Kathleen Cleaver a little bit later after the Baldwin, because they were in hiding, they were in exile over there. So anyway, I asked, and I was trying to get Baldwin to sell Yale his papers. And subsequently, they went to the New York Public Library, and I'm on the board of directors of the New York Public Library.
And that is a sister institution.
Yeah, that's right. And I said to him, what if the thing that launched James Baldwin on his career was a Rosenwald Fellowship that Richard Wright recommended him for. And I said, if I could show you the letter of recommendation Richard Wright wrote to get you the fellowship that took you to Paris, would you sell us your papers? And he said, yes. So I took him to the Beinecke and took him to the card catalog. Remember those?
Oh, we still have them.
I know, I saw them. I saw it in the thing. I went, wow, look at that wooden card catalog. And I opened it and let him read the card. And I said, now do you want me, the librarian, to fetch the letter? And he said, this is just too much. This is just too much. And then he turned him and we walked away. So that was my most
That's quite
moving
a
moment.
story.
And
So people will be very angry unless I talk to you a bit about finding your roots.
Okay.
And I think that you have at least like one or two clips that you would like to show us. Do you want to cue one of them?
Sure. People ask me, you know, we've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of guests. Tony Burrows is here, my good friend. We did Oprah Winfrey together with Finding Oprah's Roots. Finding Your Roots has had 3 iterations. When I started it, it was called African American Lives because I only did African Americans. And it was a big hit. It was so big, I got a letter from a lady saying, "Dear Professor Gates, I've always admired your stances against anti-Semitism in the black community and for cultural pluralism, but after watching 2 seasons of African American Lives, I've decided you're a big fat racist because you only do black people. Why don't you do a Russian Jewish person like me?" And I swear to God, it never occurred to me I could do white people. You know, my whole brand was blackness, you know. And so I called our sponsor, a black woman named Ingrid Saunders Jones, who was president of the Koch Foundation. And I said, "Ingrid, I'm holding a letter from this Jewish lady. It says, you know, I'm a racist." She goes, "What?" She said, "We don't do white people. Can we do white people?" Because if the sponsor wasn't going to keep writing the checks, Coke at the time was our lead sponsor. And she said, after a long pause, and she's an African-American woman, she said, "Well, Skip, I only have one thing to say to you about that lady's letter." And I said, "What?" And she said, "There are a lot more white people drinking Coke than black people." I took that as a yes. And so we completely reinvented the thing in 2009, and we named it Faces of America. So it was called African American Lives and Faces of America. And in Face of America, when we first did everybody, I mean, I used the principle that Noah would use, picking guests, 2 of everything. 2 Catholics, 2 Jews, 2 Asians, you know, Yo-Yo Ma, Christy Yamaguchi, Irish, Stephen Colbert, Irish Catholic, Mario Batali, an Italian Catholic, Meryl Streep, just because I think she's a goddess, you know, and I wanted to do her DNA. And then someone threatened to sue us over the name. So PBS said, "Change the name," and I went, "Finding Your Roots," which is the best name. But in 2009, something else happened. The scientists at the Broad Institute, one of the most famous institutes for genetics in the world, it's a jointly sponsored by MIT and Harvard. They called me and they said, "You need me. You need us." And they taught me about autosomal DNA. And with autosomal DNA, but before that, we were just tracing mitochondrial DNA, which we all get from our mother. It's an identical genetic fingerprint that you get from your mother. Everybody here got their mitochondrial DNA signature from their mother. And Y DNA, half of you, the men in this room, the thing that makes us men is that we have Y DNA. But the non-sex chromosomes are called autosomal DNA. And they taught me that you can use autosomal DNA to get around the proverbial brick walls often in the paper trail. The brick walls are when the paper trail runs out, right? And so it allows you to do all kind of marvelous things. But one of the things that it allowed us to do is to trace the biological identity of the parents of adoptees. And the first person who came and asked us to do that was Tea Leone. So if you could roll the clip, that would be great.
So on the next page, I'm going to show you a chart that compares your mother's DNA to our tester's DNA. Any segments that they share will be highlighted in red.
Okay.
You ready to find out?
Yeah.
Would you please turn the page? You see a lot of red or you see little red?
I see a lot of red. Shared DNA, 26%.
And I said that if they share 25%, then they shared a mother.
Right.
Your biological grandmother is a woman named Abilene Gindrat. I want to show you something. Will you turn the page?
Yeah. Who's that?
That's your grandmother.
God. She looks like my mom a lot. Boy, that is... I mean, even just the way she holds her head.
Really?
Yeah.
And when I started, I never dreamed. Remember, when I started this, I was just trying to help Oprah find out what ethnic group she was from in Africa. You know, I had no idea that this thing would morph the way that it did. And Taya's mother and she argued about, they fought over whether she should approach me. Because Taya's mother was born in Arkansas in 1947 or 48, was adopted by a wealthy family in Texas. And she had a very happy childhood. She knew that she was adopted. And she didn't want to know anything about her birth parents, but Taya did. And Taya has a daughter. And so Taya came to us, and I said, we've never tried, but we're going to do our best. And then bingo, we found, not only did we find Taya's mother's mother, but Taya's mother's father. They were in a boarding house, living in a boarding house at the same time in a paper mill town, and that's where they obviously had an affair. And we actually found the woman. We found Taya's grandmother, 98 years old, wow, in Arkansas, and Taya and her mother flew down with Taya's daughter, and you know, she met her mother with and two of her half sisters. You know, it was amazing. Now, the second tape. Remember the Jewish lady who wrote to me and changed fundamentally Finding Your Roots? Please play the next clip. This is Mandy Patinkin.
On November 2nd, 1942, the Germans and their collaborators surrounded the Bronx ghetto. Its inhabitants were loaded onto wagons and taken to a nearby town, where more than 2,000 of them were packed into trains bound for Treblinka, a concentration camp. Their fate was now sealed.
On the 10th, everyone is already in Treblinka. According to the evidence, all the Bronx Jews, men and women separately, breathed their last in the Treblinka gas chambers on the 10th of November, 1942, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Their bodies were burned in the crematorium in Treblinka. Oh my God. You know, I went there and I would say to people, I've been interviewed so many times, I said, I don't think any of my relatives died in the Holocaust. I was never given this information. This is, I don't have words. That's unbelievable. Almighty. That's unreal. Man. Whew.
The closest, the person I knew closest to a saint was Congressman John Lewis. I loved John Lewis, and he was what he appeared to be. And for a politician, that's a miracle, right? And, you know, John was pivotal in the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 because he allowed himself to be beaten up on Pettus Bridge. They were marching to get the right of black people in the South, the right to vote for black men, black people in the South. Black men had the right to vote in the South because of the Reconstruction Amendment. And the first Reconstruction Amendment in 1867 said all black men in the former Confederacy should be given the right to vote. And so the summer of 1867, I call the first Freedom Summer, okay? And 80% of all eligible black men registered to vote in the summer of 1867, and in the general election of 1868, 500,000 voted. And these people were illiterate because they were former slaves, and it was illegal to teach of an enslaved person to read and write. And then the right to vote was, all black men, including in the North, got the right to vote with the 15th Amendment. Then it was taken away with the rise of Jim Crow, starting in 1890, which is why John is on the Pettus Bridge in March 1965, being beaten to get the right to vote back for black people in the South. Please play the tape.
Advance toward the gate. See that they disperse.
The images captured that day in Selma are seared onto our national consciousness. And as we look at them today, it seems unbelievable that the African American right to vote could have posed such a profound threat as to incite this kind of violence.
The vote is the most powerful instrument, most powerful nonviolent tool in a democratic society. A knowing that a member of my family registered and voted in Alabama 100 years before I did, before my mother, my father, my grandparents. It's amazing. So maybe, just maybe, it's part of my DNA, my bloodline, or whatever you want to call it.
I mean, who would have believed that your ancestors were the pioneering people who voted in the state of Alabama among the former slaves?
It's just incredible. This is too much.
Finally, if one of the things I learned in my tutorial in genetics at the Broad was that if two people, no matter how random, share long identical stretches of DNA, that means that you have a common ancestor somewhere in your family tree in the last couple hundred years. Long identical stretches of DNA, okay? And we call it DNA cousins. And not everybody does. So when we do a guest, on Sunday, I will trace the ancestry of Forrest Whitaker, the actor. And then at the end, I'll tell him if he has any DNA cousins who've been in the whole history of the series, right? Because of this fact. And this happened for two guests whom I think you'll recognize.
The first test will reveal how Jewish you are.
Mm-hmm.
So out of 100%, how Jewish do you think you are?
I'd say 85.
Okay, let's turn the page. Can you read your percentage of Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry?
Wow, 97.
97.8%.
97.7 Ashkenazi Jewish.
Basically, you're like Ivory soap. Their percentages were similar, but there was one uncanny surprise in store for each of them. Their genomes contained a startling finding. While comparing their DNA results to the results of other people we've tested, we found one significant match. Evidence within their own chromosomes of a relative neither suspected they shared. We match your DNA against everybody who's been in any of my series. If you have long identical stretches, that means you're cousins.
Oh, I have some cousins?
Yep.
I hope it's a good athlete. What the hell?
You're kidding. Oh my God. That is unbelievable. It's true?
It's true.
Oh, that's so funny. That is really funny. That is amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah. All right, Cousin Bernie.
Cousin Bernie.
Yeah.
People say to me, they talk about Larry David, and I say, he does a better Bernie Sanders than I do. Yeah. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Can you do a Larry David impression?
Yeah, me. I'm doing it. I thought it was pretty good. This is unbelievable.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Please join me in congratulating once again Professor Gates for winning the Newberry Award.
Thank you. Thank you very much.